They said her ticket was fake. They said she didn't belong in business class just because of how she looked, but Brielle Thompson didn't shout. She didn't fight. She picked up her torn boarding pass with quiet dignity and sent one simple message. By the time the truth came out, the flight attendant who humiliated her would realize she hadn't just insulted a teenage girl. She had tried to throw out the daughter of the man who owns the entire airline. Stay with us. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on because stories like this are only just beginning. The floor of Atlanta International gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, reflecting sharp shoes and sharper glances. Voices rose and fell like distant waves. Boarding calls, suitcase wheels, quiet judgment, dressed in tailored suits. Brielle Thompson walked forward with quiet intention. At 17, she had learned to carry herself with care, back straight, eyes steady, silence where it mattered. A black girl from South Memphis wasn't expected to line up in business class. Not in a hoodie, not with worn sneakers, not with skin like hers, but expectations weren't the ceiling she lived under anymore. Elijah Brooks trailed beside her, dragging his carry-on with one hand, grin ready on his face. "Soon as you step on that plane," he whispered, "you'll be asking the pilot for the controls." She smirked, just barely. "Only if they ask nicely." He laughed, shaking his head. He knew her rhythms. He'd been her anchor since 5th grade, always close, always believing. But even his familiar presence couldn't erase the undercurrent moving around them. People stared. Not long, just long enough to make it known. A pearl-clad woman shifted her purse across her shoulder. A businessman glanced at Brielle's boarding pass, his eyes lingering like punctuation. She felt the weight of being seen not as a student or a traveler, but as a question mark. In her pocket, her fingers brushed the edge of her laminated itinerary. It was more than a ticket. It was proof of everything she'd worked for: New York, the aviation conference, the beginning of what she dreamed could be a life above the clouds. Her breath was slow, deliberate, a memory stirred. Her father, Malcolm, kneeling beside her after a long shift at the shop, his palms rough, his voice low. "You're light, Brielle," he'd said, pressing 2 fingers gently to her chest. "And light always finds the sky." She'd carried those words through every class, every test, every late-night study session under the hum of a flickering bulb. Now they beat softly inside her ribs. Beside her, Elijah gave a gentle nudge. "You good?" She nodded. "I'm here." The line inched forward. At the front, a counter agent barely looked up. "This line is for business." Brielle met her eyes, voice calm. "I know." She handed over her ID and the printed ticket. There was a pause, just long enough. The smile from the attendant was practiced, but the hesitation said more. "You're checked in. Gate B16. Brielle received her documents back without comment. She and Elijah stepped away from the counter down the terminal, past silent stares and subtle doubt. Elijah raised a fist. She met it. "One step closer," he said. Ahead of them, planes lifted into the evening sky, metal wings catching light, pathways to futures. She didn't wear the right clothes. She didn't match the picture they expected, but she knew where she belonged. And today that place was in the air. The business class check-in lane had thinned. Behind the counter, Karen Miller stood with the poise of someone who'd drawn her lines in silence long ago and guarded them like steel. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, a badge polished to shine, a smile rehearsed but never quite real. Brielle approached, ticket in hand. Elijah stayed close, sensing a shift. Karen glanced at them, first at the hoodie, then the shoes, then the suitcase that had seen too many Greyhound stops. She didn't speak immediately. Her gaze moved across Brielle like a scanner measuring the space she took up, weighing whether she belonged in the air or stayed grounded. Brielle's voice was steady, if quiet. "Business class flight to JFK." Karen took the ticket with 2 fingers like it carried dust. She turned it over. Then again. Her mouth tightened. A pause stretched thin. "This isn't right," she muttered, then raised her voice, drawing attention. "This ticket's fake." The words hit like a slap. Passengers glanced over, interest, sharpening like knives drawn quietly. Brielle blinked. "No, there's a confirmation number. My name's on it. You can check." Karen didn't listen. Her fingers tore down the center of the paper with a slow, deliberate pull. The sound, a rip through more than just paper, rang in Brielle's ears. "You people always try to sneak in where you don't belong," Karen said flatly. "Business class isn't for stunts." The words landed with surgical cruelty. "You people." The phrase dropped into the air like a gavel. Brielle stood still, her hand still outstretched, now empty, her breath caught. Her throat tightened, but the words wouldn't rise. Not in time, not before the eyes started turning. From behind them, a man with a leather briefcase leaned to his wife and whispered, not softly, "Knew it. Always some drama with them." A girl in designer headphones stifled a giggle. Brielle felt heat rise behind her eyes, burning not from shame, but something colder, something older. Elijah stepped forward, voice low but shaking. "That ticket was real. You had no right to do that." Karen turned toward him, eyes hard. "You want security involved?" He didn't flinch. Instead, his hand reached for his phone. His thumb pressed record. "You already involved the world," he said, lifting the screen toward her face. "Say that again." Karen's smile faltered. Not gone, but weaker. Brielle looked down at the torn halves of her ticket on the counter. What she had worked for, waited for, sacrificed for, reduced to scraps. Torn, not because it was invalid, but because of what she looked like. Because of what someone decided she couldn't be. Behind them, the lines swelled with murmurs. No one stepped forward, no one asked questions. Only silence, like a wall she'd hit too many times. Then soft fingers closed around her hand. An older woman standing 2 people behind leaned forward. Silver hair, warm eyes. She didn't say much. "I saw it," she whispered. Brielle turned toward her, voice barely above breath. "She tore my ticket." "I know," the woman said. And she was wrong. Elijah kept recording, the lens shaking, his anger quiet but blinding. Somewhere deep inside, Brielle heard her father's voice again. "You're light, and light always finds the sky." But today it felt like she was standing in a tunnel with no way up. Elijah's voice was steady now, though the tremor hadn't left his hands. "You just tore up her ticket in front of everyone." "For what?" "Because of how she looks." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're raising your voice. If you don't want to be removed, I suggest you take a step back." Elijah didn't budge. The camera was still recording, held firm. "So you're okay with the world seeing what you just did?" Karen gave a shrug, her tone icy and rehearsed. "There's no video that can fix a fake ticket. I've already alerted airport security." That wasn't true, but truth hadn't mattered since Brielle walked up to the counter. Brielle still hadn't moved. She stood with the torn ticket crumpled in one palm, the other hand pressed flat against her side like it was holding her upright. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Some looked away, some looked through her. A few stared, whispering behind raised brows and boarding passes. Her voice didn't come. Not yet. Miss Clara Jensen, the elderly woman with silver hair who had stepped forward before, was still watching. She moved a step closer now, placing herself beside Brielle. Not in front, not behind, but beside. She was polite, Miss Jensen said gently to no one in particular, though loud enough to be heard. And that ticket looked valid. Karen ignored her. Her smile tightened as she turned to assist the next passenger. "Next. Please." Brielle hadn't left the line, but to Karen she had already disappeared. The man behind them stepped up to the counter, pretending not to notice, averted eyes, shuffled feet. A theater of silence from people who'd heard everything but chose not to remember. Elijah lowered his phone for a moment. "What do we do now?" Brielle didn't answer. She unfolded the pieces of the ticket like it might somehow stitch itself back together. Her fingers trembled, but her spine stayed straight. She looked down at her hands, one holding the remnants of her dream, the other empty, and felt a surge of heat rise in her chest. It wasn't shame, it wasn't fear. It was the kind of fire that doesn't burn but hardens. A girl nearby giggled. A smirk, a whisper. Of course she made a scene. Brielle closed her eyes. For half a breath, maybe less, her father's voice echoed like it had always lived inside her. "You're light, Brielle, and light always finds the sky." She opened her eyes, not tearful, not loud, just steady. "I'm not leaving," she said more to herself than anyone else. Karen, who heard her anyway, scoffed. "Suit yourself." Elijah leaned in. "Security might come." Brielle nodded. "Let them." There was no tantrum, no pleading, no raised voice to match the wrong she'd just been handed. Just a young black girl in a hoodie standing in front of a line of people pretending not to see what was happening. Miss Jensen touched her arm, soft as a prayer. "You don't have to fight alone." "Child." Brielle looked at her, and for the first time in minutes, her jaw unclenched. "I know," she whispered, "but some fights find you anyway." She stood taller, and she waited. They didn't speak for the first few minutes after walking away. The terminal buzzed with quiet announcements and the muted shuffle of polished shoes. Business travelers with leather duffels brushed past, unaware or uncaring that just feet away, a dream had been publicly shredded. Elijah held his phone like it was sacred. He checked the upload progress, 87%. He turned off the screen, tucked it deep into his pocket, and exhaled hard. She touched my phone. He muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. Tried to snatch it like we don't get to defend ourselves. Brielle didn't answer. Her face was tight, her steps slow. They reached the edge of Terminal B just past a quiet gate with no boarding calls. There, against a wide window that overlooked the tarmac, Brielle sat down hard on a row of empty seats. She said nothing. Her hands rested in her lap, the torn pieces of the ticket still folded neatly in her palm. Her breathing was steady, but too steady, like she was holding something inside that had nowhere to go. Elijah sat beside her but didn't speak. He knew that silence too. A few moments passed before Miss Clara Jensen appeared again, walking slowly, her eyes sharp but kind. She didn't ask to sit, she just did. Gently, she reached over and touched Brielle's hand. "It wasn't your fault," Clara said, voice like morning rain. "I've been alive long enough to recognize what that woman did, and I've seen people get away with worse." Brielle blinked fast once, then again. Her lip trembled. "She didn't even see me," she whispered. "She just saw what she wanted to see." Miss Jensen gave a small nod. "Some people decide who you are before you ever open your mouth." That was the moment Brielle finally let herself breathe. Her shoulders fell forward, and with one small shake of her head, the tears came. Quiet. No sobs. No gasps. Just the slow unraveling of the storm she'd tried to hold in. "I worked so hard," she murmured. "I studied until my hands cramped. I built my own wing models. I got a scholarship. I aced every exam. And still, they look at me like I don't belong." She didn't say, "Because I'm black." She didn't need to. It hung between them, unspoken but thunderous. Flashbacks drifted through her mind like fractured film reels. She was 10 again, raising her hand in science class only to hear the teacher laugh. "Aviation, sweetheart. Maybe aim for something more realistic." She was 13, getting mocked for reading pilot manuals during lunch. She was 15, sketching jet blueprints while kids called her flightless Brielle. But none of it stopped her, and neither would this. Elijah pulled his phone back out now, vibrating in his pocket. The upload was complete. He tapped to open a social platform and began writing. "This just happened at Atlanta International. A young black girl's ticket torn apart in front of everyone. Told she didn't belong in business class. Not because of the ticket, because of her skin. Watch, share demand. Better, #justice. For Brielle." He looked at Brielle. "We're not letting this slide." She wiped her face with her sleeve and nodded slowly. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I just want people to see what it's like, really see Elijah hit post." The video was live, and the first ripple in the storm had just begun. By the time Brielle had dried her cheeks, the world had already started paying attention. Elijah's post caught fire within 20 minutes. The video was under a minute-long blurry, yes, but undeniable. It showed Karen Miller, a uniformed flight attendant at a major U.S. airline, tearing a valid ticket while looking a teenage black girl dead in the eyes. Then came the line, clear as a bell, sharp as a knife. "People like you don't belong in business class." The comments flooded in. "This is disgusting, tag." The airline. "Make them answer." She was calm. He was filming. "Why destroy the ticket?" Not surprised. Seen it too many times. The hashtag took shape organically without planning or coordination. Justice for Brielle. And just like that, the spark leapt beyond Gate B-17. Clara Jensen, now sitting beside Brielle and Elijah, took out her own phone. With fingers that moved slower but no less steady, she recorded a short message. "I'm Clara Jensen. I witnessed what happened to this young lady. Her ticket was valid. She was polite, respectful. The employee who tore it up acted out of pure prejudice. I saw it with my own eyes. This needs to be addressed. Not tomorrow, today." She posted it. Less than 5 minutes later, a freelance journalist retweeted it with a caption, "New witness speaks out." The story's not just going viral, it's gaining receipts. Brielle stared at the screen, dazed, as her name climbed trends lists. "I didn't think people would care," she murmured. "They care," Elijah said. "They're just used to seeing it and not knowing what to do. Now they have something to hold." Somewhere down the concourse, a young woman in an Aerosky uniform hesitated at the staff corridor. Her name badge read Rachel Green. She had seen the video. More importantly, she'd seen the moment in real time. She was 2 counters over when Karen raised her voice. Rachel had frozen, then paralyzed by fear by the unspoken rule drilled into new employees. Don't challenge your senior. But now the world was watching. She stepped into the hallway and pulled out her phone. No recording, no dramatic statement. Just one tweet. My name is Rachel. I work at the airport. I saw what happened. The girl didn't do anything wrong. I was there. It wasn't eloquent, but it was true. And that was enough. Reporters began arriving an hour later, first local, then national. By then, the airport's PR team had already received over 200 emails, 50 voicemails, and a storm of tags on every platform they used. Terminal B grew uneasy. Travelers leaned over phone screens, murmuring. A mother holding her toddler stared at Brielle, then smiled softly. Elijah's phone buzzed nonstop. DMs from media outlets, activists, and strangers asking how to help. Brielle sat still, her fingers gripping her hoodie sleeve, eyes wide. She wasn't sure whether to feel hope or fear. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I know, Clara said gently. But maybe it asked for you. Brielle looked up. Across the terminal, someone was holding up a tablet. On it, her video played in a loop. Dozens were gathered around it now, watching, frowning, nodding. One woman wiped a tear. Another crossed her arms and said something to a man beside her. He shook his head and walked away. It was just the beginning, but it was already more than anyone expected. The airport press office had never seen a day like this. Reporters clustered around the terminal's glass windows, lights blinking across their cameras as headlines updated by the minute. Screens inside the departure halls replayed the clip again and again. Brielle Thompson's torn boarding pass, the voice of flight attendant Karen Miller slicing through the air. People like you don't belong in business class. Inside a small private room beyond gate C-14, the atmosphere was thick. Airport manager David Stein rubbed his temple as he reviewed the incident report. Beside him, representatives from SkyStar Airline's legal and public affairs teams whispered urgently, their tones growing more strained with every new update. He looked up as the door creaked open. Brielle stood just inside the frame, shoulders back, eyes steady, her best friend Elijah behind her. The girl who'd been humiliated now stood like a storm waiting to break. Stein gestured to the seat across from him. Miss Thompson, I'd like to hear your side. Brielle didn't sit. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded paper, the original booking confirmation printed and circled in red. My father booked the ticket, she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. Through the executive account, Malcolm Thompson. Silence. The name hung in the air for a beat too long. A slow ripple passed through the room. David blinked. Sorry, did you say Malcolm Thompson? Brielle nodded. Founder and principal owner of SkyStar Airlines. She didn't need to say more. The weight of her words fell like iron. The executive team exchanged pale glances. Stein reached for the printed manifest, scanning the system entry for the confirmation number on Brielle's ticket. There it was, authorized by M. Thompson. Priority tagged through SkyStar's highest tier account, internal executive clearance level. Elijah leaned forward slightly, watching the panic spread behind the manager's eyes. Stein swallowed. We had no idea. No, Brielle said. Karen did. She saw a black girl in a hoodie. She didn't care about my name. A young woman from PR finally found her voice. Miss Thompson, if this is true, then we're looking at a direct violation of federal passenger discrimination statutes, not to mention internal ethics. Before she could finish, a knock interrupted the room. Rachel Green entered, a junior customer service agent, visibly nervous but resolute. I just wanted to say, I saw it too. I was working the secondary desk. Karen didn't even scan the ticket before she tore it. She just looked at her and assumed Elijah's fists clenched by his sides. Brielle stood tall. You thought I was nobody, just another girl from South Memphis. You didn't know whose wings you tried to clip. David Stein removed his glasses, pressing the bridge of his nose as the realization settled in Miss Thompson. Please give us time to respond appropriately. There will be consequences. Brielle looked him dead in the eye. There already are. She turned and walked out her steps, unhurried. Behind her, the room exploded into motion calls to legal PR, scrambling, risk management spinning in panic. But nothing could put the moment back in the box. Because Brielle wasn't just a passenger now. She was the daughter of the man who built the airline from the ground up, the very sky. Karen thought she didn't belong in had his name etched across its wings, and soon so would hers. The private conference room near Gate C-14 was tense. Airport manager David Stein sat rigidly, eyes fixed on the door. Beside him, Karen Miller fidgeted, her polished demeanor cracking. The revelation that Brielle Thompson was the daughter of Skystar Airlines founder had sent shockwaves through the staff. The door swung open. Malcolm Thompson entered his presence, commanding, tall, and composed. His eyes scanned the room, settling on Karen. Behind him, Brielle followed, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson?" Stein began rising. Malcolm raised a hand, silencing him. "I want an explanation," he said, voice calm but firm. "Why was my daughter treated like a criminal?" Karen stood, attempting to regain composure. "Sir, I was following protocol. The ticket seemed suspicious, and—" "Protocol," Malcolm interrupted. "Your protocol includes tearing up a valid ticket and humiliating a young woman in public." Karen hesitated. I didn't recognize her. She wasn't in the system under your name." Brielle stepped forward. "The ticket was booked under my father's executive account. My name was on it." Karen looked at Brielle, then back at Malcolm. "I apologize, it was a misunderstanding." Malcolm's gaze was unwavering. "A misunderstanding rooted in prejudice." Stein interjected, attempting to defuse the situation. "Mr. Thompson, we deeply regret this incident. We'll ensure it doesn't happen again." Brielle turned to her father. "Dad, I don't want special treatment, I want fairness for everyone." Malcolm nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "Understood." He faced Stein and Karen. "This isn't just about my daughter. It's about every passenger who deserves respect and dignity." Karen lowered her head, the weight of her actions sinking in. As the meeting concluded, Malcolm placed a hand on Brielle's shoulder. "You've shown strength and grace. I'm proud of you." Brielle smiled faintly. "Thanks, Dad." Outside the room, the terminal buzzed with activity, unaware of the pivotal moment that had just occurred behind closed doors. A hush had fallen over the conference room, tucked behind the Skystar Executive Lounge. The windows overlooked runway 2, but no one inside looked beyond the glass. David Stein sat stiffly at the far end of the polished table, his phone face down, hands clasped as if in prayer. Karen Miller stood beside him, her face pale, lips tight. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, then the door opened. Malcolm Thompson stepped in with quiet power, wearing a charcoal suit that didn't need to shout to command attention. His eyes were dark, unreadable. Beside him, Brielle walked in silence, composed but not cold. She wore the same hoodie, same sneakers, but something about her posture had shifted. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the storm they hadn't seen coming. "Malcolm didn't sit, Mr. Stein," he said, voice low but deliberate. "Why was my daughter treated like a criminal?" David cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson first. Let me say how sorry we are." "I didn't ask for an apology," Malcolm cut in, gaze unblinking. "I asked for an explanation." Karen opened her mouth. "Sir, I followed protocol. Her ticket looks suspicious, and you tore it in half." Malcolm's voice didn't rise, but the air shifted, in front of a crowd with no verification, no conversation. Just judgment. Karen's hands trembled slightly. "I didn't know who she was." "That's exactly the problem," Malcolm said. He turned to David. "You both saw a young black woman in a hoodie traveling alone and decided she didn't belong. You didn't just see her, you labeled her." David leaned forward, trying to regain footing. "Mr. Thompson, we recognize that mistakes were made." "Mistakes," Malcolm echoed, letting the word hang in the room like smoke. "That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice, one rooted in bias." Karen stepped in again, desperation cracking her voice. "There were security concerns. I was doing my job." "No," Brielle spoke now, her voice steady. "You weren't doing your job. You were doing what your prejudice told you to do." Karen faltered. David looked between them, searching for neutral ground that no longer existed. Malcolm turned to his daughter. "Do you want to be rebooked on the next flight in first class? I'll have it arranged immediately." Brielle shook her head. "No, I don't want special treatment. I don't want privilege because my father owns the airline. I want fairness for me. For the next girl who walks up to your counter in sneakers and dreams." The silence that followed was thicker than tension. It was reckoning. Malcolm nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You heard her?" David swallowed hard. What do you want us to do?" "Start by acknowledging what happened," Brielle said. "Not just in this room, but publicly. This isn't going away quietly." Karen looked down, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But it did, Malcolm said. And now we deal with the truth. As he placed a gentle hand on his daughter's back, the room no longer belonged to the executives in suits. It belonged to a girl who stood her ground, and the man behind her who built the sky she now demanded to rise through. By mid-afternoon, word had spread across the airport faster than any departure board update. A press conference had been called, not by the airline's PR team, not by a crisis manager, but by Malcolm Thompson himself. Outside Terminal B, a platform had been hastily arranged near the arrivals curb, now flanked by cameras, reporters, and murmuring onlookers. Protesters had begun to form a semicircle holding hand-drawn signs, "Let her fly," "Prejudice has no altitude, justice for Brielle." At the center of it all stood Brielle, flanked by Malcolm and quietly but firmly Miss Clara Jensen. The elderly woman held no sign, no microphone, only the steady weight of a witness who had seen too much and decided not to stay silent. Malcolm stepped forward first. He didn't clear his throat or glance at talking points. His voice was calm, deliberate, and devastatingly clear. This morning, my daughter, Brielle Thompson, was humiliated at this very airport. Not because she lacked credentials, not because she was aggressive, but because someone looked at her skin and decided she didn't belong. The crowd murmured, cameras flashing. I founded Skystar Airlines to connect people to remove barriers, not build them. But today, one of our own staff tore up that mission in the blink of an eye. He paused. Behind him, Brielle remained quiet. Clara reached over, gently resting a hand on her arm. Effective immediately, Malcolm continued. Karen Miller has been placed on administrative suspension pending formal investigation. And let me be clear, this is not a temporary gesture. This is a turning point. Inside the airport, David Stein sat alone in a sterile conference room, the door shut tightly behind him. An HR representative and legal advisor were reviewing employee testimonies. The file in front of them was already thick and growing. Rachel Green, the younger check-in employee, had submitted her formal statement just minutes earlier. "I saw it all," she had written. Brielle's ticket was valid. Karen didn't even check the system before tearing it. She just assumed I should have spoken up sooner. I won't stay silent again. It wasn't just a document. It was a match to gasoline. Outside, a reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Thompson, will there be broader reforms at Skystar following this incident?" Malcolm nodded solemnly. "Yes, we are launching a comprehensive review of all front-facing staff training, bias awareness, de-escalation protocols, and most importantly, accountability at every level. This airline bears my name, but from this moment on, it must also bear my values." He stepped back. Brielle took the podium next, her voice soft but unwavering. "I didn't ask to be the center of this. I came here to go to a conference to learn to chase a dream. But the moment I stepped to that counter, someone decided I wasn't worthy of the sky. Today, I'm here to say I am." The crowd stirred. Protesters cheered. A few passengers from earlier in the day now stood among them, shame softening their faces. Some clapped, some bowed their heads, and behind it all, Clara stood tall, a quiet sentinel of truth. As the conference wrapped up and the cameras began to power down, the whispers of change drifted through the airport like wind beneath wings. The silence that had once surrounded injustice had broken wide open, and Brielle, no longer just a passenger, had become the voice leading it. The press conference was over, but the tremors it sent through the airport and the world beyond were only beginning to ripple outward. Inside the Skystar Executive Lounge, Malcolm's assistant handed Brielle a new boarding pass printed clean and crisp with bold black letters. "Business class, seat 3A. It's yours." "Ms. Thompson," she said gently. "We've reserved a seat on the next flight to New York." Brielle stared down at the ticket, then back up at her father. Malcolm nodded, proud but silent, letting her choose. She held the pass in her hand, the weight of it less than the pressure building in her chest. "Before I board," she said, "there's something I need to do." She turned and walked out of the lounge, not toward the gate, but toward the main terminal, where a growing crowd of passengers, reporters, and onlookers still lingered, some curious, others simply watching history unfold. Karen Miller had remained in the shadows since the suspension, avoiding reporters, avoiding the mirror. But now she stood in front of the Skystar welcome desk, flanked by security and a representative from HR. Brielle approached. For a moment, Karen couldn't meet her gaze. Then she did, eyes wide, red-rimmed, and swimming with shame. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she mumbled. I didn't realize I made a mistake. Brielle took a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. This wasn't about a mistake, Karen. It was about a belief you acted on that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly belong in the seat I paid for. Karen blinked rapidly as if hoping to cry away the truth. I don't need a new ticket, Brielle continued. I don't need special treatment. I need you and everyone like you to unlearn whatever taught you to see people like me as lesser. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, walking back toward the gate, her steps steady, grounded by conviction. In the children's play zone near Gate 17, a group of kids had gathered their parents watching the commotion from afar. Some of the kids had seen Brielle's face on the airport TVs. A few recognized her from the terminal earlier that morning. She knelt beside them, her hoodie still wrinkled, her sneakers still scuffed. No business suit, no stage lights. Just her. Hi, she said gently. I know today's been loud, but I want you to hear something from me, not the news. The children leaned in wide-eyed. When someone tells you that you don't belong because of how you look or where you come from, you look them in the eye and you remember something. You are light, and light always finds the sky. One of the girls barely ate whispered, Are you going to fly the plane? Brielle smiled. One day maybe, but even if I don't, I'll make sure the runway is wide open for you. A passenger filmed the moment from across the terminal. Within hours, that clip would go viral, broadcast on evening news and shared under the hashtag #RiseWithBrielle. Back in the executive offices of SkyStar Airlines, Malcolm sat at his desk surrounded by his senior leadership team. We're not doing damage control, he said. We're doing culture repair. He announced the creation of a new internal initiative, the Horizon Project, a full overhaul of employee bias training, hiring practices, and accountability standards across every level of the company. This isn't just about Brielle, he said. It's about every voice silenced by doubt and every gate built by fear. In the terminal, as boarding was called, Brielle finally made her way to the gate. Not as a victim, not even as the owner's daughter, but as a symbol, a girl who turned prejudice into purpose, a girl who refused to let a torn ticket define her flight. The boarding gate was quiet now. No protests, no cameras, just the steady, familiar voice over the intercom announcing final calls. Brielle stepped forward, ticket in hand, not clenched. This time, not trembling, just held calmly and firmly. The gate agent looked up, her expression soft. Welcome aboard, Miss Thompson. Brielle nodded with a quiet, thank you, and walked down the jet bridge. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. Seat 3A business class. She took her place and settled in, not just into the seat, but into the truth she had fought to reclaim. Out the window, the tarmac shimmered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, the past version of herself, the girl in the hoodie, the girl with the torn ticket, was finally being allowed to soar. 2 days later, a single press release made national headlines. Karen Miller resigns from SkyStar Airlines. In her statement, she acknowledged a moment that exposed a lifetime of unconscious bias and called it a wake-up. I didn't want, but desperately needed. The story didn't end with her. It grew. News outlets replayed the airport footage alongside Brielle's impromptu speech to the children at Gate 17. Her words, "You are light and light always finds the sky," spread across social media, etched on posters, quoted in classrooms, even printed on the side of SkyStar's employee training manuals. Malcolm's Horizon Project became more than a corporate initiative. It sparked a movement inside the aviation industry. Recruitment programs in underserved communities, scholarships for aspiring pilots of color and mandatory bias, education for all employees. And as for Brielle, 3 months later, the ballroom at the New York Aviation Institute glowed under warm lights, a stage, hundreds of attendees, the annual Voices of the Future conference. Brielle stepped up to the podium, not in a hoodie but in a sleek navy blue suit. Her curls framed her face like a crown, and when she looked out at the audience, there wasn't a trace of doubt in her gaze. She began her speech the way she always dreamed she would. "When I was a little girl in Memphis, I thought flying meant escaping. Now I know it means claiming space." The room erupted in applause. Afterward, a tall woman with sharp eyes and silver hair approached her backstage. "Brielle Thompson," she said. Brielle turned. "Yes." The woman extended her hand. "Dr. Evelyn Carter, NASA Aeronautics Division." Brielle nearly froze. "I saw what you presented. More importantly, I saw how you carried yourself when it mattered most. We'd like you to join our summer research program. If you're interested, we'll make it happen. Brielle blinked, then smiled through tears she hadn't expected. Yes, I'm interested. Later that year, back in South Memphis, a narrow classroom buzzed with laughter and folded paper wings. Brielle stood in front of a dozen kids, some with calloused hands, some with shy eyes, but all with the same spark she once carried. She moved between their desks, adjusting paper folds, helping balance wings. A little girl with beads in her braids held up her crooked plane. "It won't fly straight," she said. Brielle knelt beside her, fixing the edges with practiced fingers. "See this?" she whispered. "These wings just need belief and direction. That's all flying really is." The girl looked up. "Miss Brielle, is the sky really for people like us?" Brielle smiled, her voice calm. "Certain. No, sweet girl. The sky is for all of us." In the background, sunlight streamed through the windows. Planes flew overhead, and one paper jet light, small, imperfect, soared across the room, as if aiming for something far beyond the ceiling. Brielle watched it float, hand on her heart. This wasn't the end. This was the takeoff. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Brielle Thompson didn't ask for special treatment. She asked for fairness and proved that quiet courage can echo louder than hate. This story reminds us that racial prejudice still lives in places as ordinary as an airport check-in line. It reminds us that even in silence, injustice leaves a mark, and that dignity, when held with strength, can light a fire the world can't ignore. In our personal lives, we must speak up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. In the workplace, we must hold ourselves and others accountable, especially when no one's watching. As a community, we must build systems that see people fully, not through the lens of skin, but of spirit. Because when one voice rises, others learn to lift off too, and in doing so, we make the sky big enough for all of us.